And we are live on Facebook, Stan the Fan from Pressbox and PressBoxOnline.com. My co-host is Gary Stein. And Gary, we've got a very special guest today. He's the man that gave us a lot of work in the sports world in Baltimore. That's because he negotiated the deal back in 1995 to bring the Cleveland Browns to Baltimore. I'm talking about John Moag, an old friend. And John, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you guys?
We're doing good. We're doing good. Hey,
Good.
I brought you on to talk about your negotiations to bring the Browns to Baltimore. And I also brought you on to talk about what this pandemic has done to the wide world of sports, professional sports. But I thought we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, in light of that police officer killing someone or shooting someone in Kenosha, Wisconsin, we've now seen protests lead to the cancellation of 3 NBA playoff games, and the league essentially sort of supports the players in this movement. I thought I'd ask you because I know you did some work with the NBA.
Yeah. You know, the relationship between the NBA and its players is far different than in any of the other leagues.
Yeah.
And it has been for a long time. I think it kind of goes back to when Magic Johnson was sick with AIDS, and David Stern rallied behind him and said, talked to his teammates and said, "You are playing with this man." And then when they played in the Olympics, David really said, "You are playing." He gave him no choice. So there's always been a very strong relationship. It obviously gets strained during collective bargaining, but it's been a strong personal relationship between not only the commissioner and the players, but the other owners as well. They're very close. And that part of that is the team is much smaller. Yeah. So it's got more of a family kind of feel to it. They spend a lot of time close together. And so the relationship that's developed has been extraordinary in a lot of ways and very powerful and very beneficial. David was a fabulous commissioner.
Yeah.
And Adam has taken it a step further. He doesn't have the hard edge that David had. And Adam is even closer in a lot of ways to the players because David would get in their face. You know, he'd tell them when he thought they were stupid, and he'd let them know that. Adam is a gentler commissioner, but he's also really forward thinking. And it's not only how they've handled COVID, which has been extraordinarily successful, but on race relations, they've always been way out in front of the other leagues, as they should be. I mean, it's effectively an African-American sport in a lot of ways. And so they've been great missionaries, I think, to the whole issue of race and how people react to race. And they've been great spokespeople. They've not been obnoxious. They've really been able to kind of bring it home. And that's what that's what Milwaukee did today. And Milwaukee said, this has got to stop. We can't just keep shooting our young African-American kids and young people. And so it was appropriate, I think, that they took the move they did. A little surprising they didn't let Orlando know that they weren't going to do it. That may have just been a misstep. But it's no surprise to me that Adam then jumped on that and said, yeah, this is totally appropriate, basically.
Now, recently, in the last week or 10 days, Roger Goodell, who again, when Colin Kaepernick was doing his thing, with the kneeling as a protest, a form of protest against these young African Americans getting killed, he was totally against it. Roger Goodell, he's done a total about face, and you could say it's expedient, but I think it's actually heartfelt. It's smart business. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the death of George Floyd, I think, really impacted the white community in many ways, much more so than the Black community. It was kind of de rigueur for Black families. I know my my good friend and my assistant for decades now is an African-American woman. And she started out at a very young age with her son about telling her how to behave around cops and how important it is to be careful. As white people, our parents didn't teach us that,
No.
And so when you finally see that up front and personal and watching it on TV with that knee to that guy's neck and kind of an abject look on the face of the cops, I think even the hardest of us look at that and say, that's just base, that's just so wrong.
Yeah.
And that was, there's nothing good about what happened. But if you look at how white people have reacted to that, it was a seminal moment in a lot of ways. It was like, okay, I get it. Maybe you do have something here. Maybe you really are getting killed for no reason.
It's a great irony. I maintain that I'm not sure that the white folks would have had the same attitude had we not all been home, sheltered at home with the pandemic, that we're suddenly, our lives were stopped and it was kind of frozen on our TV screens for days.
Yeah, no question about it. It impacted everybody. It certainly impacted young white people.
Yeah.
Who you see out in the streets almost in equal numbers in a lot of the cases as the African Americans who are out protesting. They're like, this is just plain wrong. We can't have this in our country.
Yeah.
Hey, John, there's a lot of reasons to have you on today. And first of all, thank you for coming on.
Sure.
A lot of them are related to your relationship to the sports world currently. And we're going to get into what you think or how you think the sports world has reacted to COVID in general and what they need to do in the future, because we don't know when COVID is really going to be over. But before we get there, I wanted to kind of take you back almost 25 years to a seminal moment in Baltimore sports history, which you were right in the middle of. And in fact, in about 2 weeks, we'll be celebrating the start of the 25th anniversary season of the Ravens here in Baltimore. I was looking up today and I read in a BBJ article way back, probably almost about 20 years ago, where people may not remember, but this whole process of you being part of bringing back football to Baltimore began in 1995 when you were selected as chairman of the Maryland Stadium Authority by the governor at that time, Paris Glendening. And you said that even though it was only 1 year after Baltimore had been denied an expansion franchise in the '94 bidding where Charlotte and Jacksonville got the franchises, that, and I'm quoting you, there couldn't have been a better time to do this. And it's interesting comment coming because I think most Baltimore sports fans would have thought that that was perhaps our best and perhaps last chance to get a franchise. Yet 1 year later, here you were doing it. So why make that comment? Why did you think it was the best time ever to do that?
Yeah, it's funny. I made that comment another time. I was on BAL radio with what's his name back then?
Ron Smith?
No.
Brett Hollander.
Josh Lewin. Josh Lewin. That's right. He would have been on it.
Yeah, it was Josh. I was on Josh's show. And I remember saying the exact same thing. And I left, got in the car to go home, and I had BAL on in the car. And he had a bunch of other sports reporters on after me. That was the second half of the show. And they were talking about my comment, and they were all laughing. They were saying, John's a really nice guy, and he's an aggressive guy, he's a go-getter, but, that's never going to happen. And I was like laughing my ass off the whole way home because I'm already talking to owners. I mean, right out of the box, I kind of did my due diligence on what happened during expansion. And we didn't have the best showing by any stretch of the imagination for a lot of reasons. And I won't go into those reasons, but it was clear to me that there wasn't going to be another expansion anytime soon, if ever. And that if we were going to get a team, we had to do it the old-fashioned way, and that was going to be steal it. So I immediately went to work on looking at those franchises around the country that were in trouble And Cleveland was on my list. Cincinnati was on my list. Arizona was on my list. Houston was on my list. And I went around the country talking to these guys alone. And no one knew who I was talking to. None of them talked. And, I had a $250 million stadium with money in my pocket. And so they would all talk to me, and they all had problems, every single one of them. Two of them moved. Cincinnati got settled, and Cincinnati was actually the first team I talked to. And at the end, I actually had probably had four actually teams that we could choose from, literally. And so I chose the team that had the best ownership, I thought, one of the better records, a historic fan base, great relations with the players, and a team that wanted to win. I'll never forget when Roger and Goodell and I got to be pretty close during the process. And I let him in at one point on where I was in my discussions with Cincinnati. And he said to me, he said, look, as part of the lease, you need to make him pay up to cap. And I laughed. I said, you got to be kidding me. He goes, oh, no, I'm not kidding you at all. He said, you need to make him pay up to cap. And that was before there was a requirement to pay the cap, before you had a minimum salary. And which I thought was crazy, but it wasn't crazy at all. I mean, it made all the sense in the world.
Let me just jump in 1 second. Was Goodell the commissioner then, or he was Paul's right-hand man? Right.
He was Paul's right-hand guy. And he was a guy who, I mean, he did all the work.
Yeah.
So in many respects, it's why Roger is a good commissioner, because he'd done it all. He'd seen it all. He'd done all of Paul's dirty work for him and all that kind of stuff. Say what you will about Roger, he happens to be a good friend of mine, but and he's not as good of a commissioner in some respects as Paul, but he's an awful lot better in other respects than Paul. So, yeah, it was an interesting time. I learned very early on a lot about the league, and I didn't view it kind of as a civic campaign. It wasn't. The civic campaign was over, and it was done with, and this was going to have to be a pure business deal, which is what it was. And amazingly, somehow we kept it quiet for as long as we did.
John, if I could just follow up quick. You talked to Roger. I'm sure you talked to Tagliabue as well.
Yeah.
Did you talk to them before you started the process, or did you bring them in once you started the process?
I brought them in early on, but I did it in a couple different ways. One, my first meeting was with a guy named Max Mullivan.
Sure,
And
I remember Max. Yeah.
Part of the show team from Max.
Max ran the process of getting Charlotte done. And he also put together the first PSL program in the country for that stadium down there. So it was a very, very innovative approach. And Max is really smart. And Max outlined for me all the reasons why we had failed. And he was spot on, and I didn't realize that right after I met with Max, but I certainly learned it over time afterwards, how correct he was. And he told me what we had, that he thought I had to do differently. And he also made the introduction to Roger first. So I started out fairly early on with Roger. I then made a decision very early in the process of letting it leak that I was interviewing lawyers for a possible antitrust suit, because I knew that would scare the hell out of the commissioner for certain. Tagliabue didn't want anything to do with that, and neither did anybody in the league. So, my approach to the league was, for the first time, using the stick a lot more than the carrot, and ignoring what their rules were and just going at it as a cowboy. knowing that if I had an owner on board, that changed the entire equation, because they respond. One thing the league does, and does very, very well, is respond to their owners, because they're the ultimate boss. So if an owner decides he wants to do something different, it's very, very hard for the league, for the front office of the league, to try to turn that around, because most of the other owners will rally behind the owner who says, I give up, I've done everything I can in the city. I can't get anywhere, and I'm going to go do this. There's very, very few other owners that would say, no, you can't do that. So it would be the commissioner that would have to do that, and that's not within his appetite.
I want to go back a little even further than Gary took you back. I wanted to go back to 1988, the night that William Donald Schaefer, on Fantastic Fans Night, after the Orioles had lost 21 games in a row, and he had some news that first game back. I remember the Orioles had won, I think, the last game on the road trip, but before the game, William Donald Schaefer, with Edward Bennett Williams up in his owner's box, very frail looking, William Donald Schaefer announced that Edward Bennett Williams had signed the agreement to keep the team in Baltimore, the lease agreement.
Yep.
I just wanted to ask you, are there many owners, because I always think Edward Bennett Williams is incredibly underappreciated in Baltimore. He really undervalued or devalued his team by signing that agreement, didn't he?
No, I disagree.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. And I actually can go back to a conversation I had last year with Bob Manfred. And we went out to lunch, and I said, Rob, as usual, we're going through a new spate of rumors on what's going to happen with the Orioles. And he goes, would you please go home and tell everybody that this league would never allow the Orioles to leave Baltimore? And I knew that.
Right.
We've been historically a fabulous market. Now that's decreased over time, and it's gone up over time, and for various reasons, the product on the field or whatever. There are plenty of reasons for the ebb and flow in baseball, and we've been in ebb for a while, but baseball is used to that. Baseball is used to seeing teams rise and fall in markets all over the country. And Rob does have some ties to Baltimore, but there's absolutely no way baseball is leaving this market.
Now, I didn't mean that the team would leave. It seemed like if there were a free agent franchise, though, with the threat of leaving, that the team may have been valued more highly when Williams sold the team. That's what I was alluding to.
No, I don't think so. I think when he sold the team, it had good value. I mean, it had a value on par with pretty much everybody. And there was really no such thing as, and there never has been a such thing as a free agent valuation for a team.
Right.
They're all valued in situ. There are owners who have realized that if I get the hell out of Dodge, I can make more money, like Stan Kroenke in St. Louis.
Sure.
Right. And so if he had sold, the league probably would not have allowed a sale on the basis of a trade to another city. The leagues are very protective of their markets. And even though the league has always wanted to be in LA and really went hard to try to keep the Rams in St. Louis, in the end it failed in St. Louis, and so they went elsewhere.
Yeah, the only time that's ever been done, and ironically, Gary and I had Wally Williams on the show last week on the Zoom video, and Wally's doing a documentary about the Colts leaving Baltimore, and he's going back before it comes out. He's going backwards to study Rosenblum and why Rosenblum was allowed to end up with the Rams and Irsay ended up with the Colts. Yep. I maintain that Rosenblum knew he was giving us a lemon here, and that was his payback for how he felt he had been treated in Baltimore.
I don't know if I agree with that. I've got to, I did the Rams deal when it was
Yeah.
sold. And so in the process, I got an awful lot of history about that franchise because it was Chip Rosenblum selling the team, who was the son, the young
Right.
son.
Right.
So there was the older son, who you probably know, and then the sister and the young son from the second wife. And it's a fascinating history. It really needs to
Well,
be a movie in and of itself.
the history is fascinating, and but I maintain Irsay would not have been allowed in the NFL to own the team in as valuable a market as Los Angeles. I think that, in other words, they had to switch franchises for that deal to work.
Well, there's an awful lot of the second wife involved in that
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, that's true too.
Where she lived, what she wanted to be, who she wanted to be, and a lot went into it.
Hey, I'll let Gary ask the next question, but let's turn, because we could spend hours talking about this. We got about 15 or 20 minutes left on our clock. Gary, let's get into the pandemic and what it's done to sports. You got the first question.
Yeah, absolutely, John. I mean, I don't have to tell you, everything's changed over the last 4 or 5 months. A lot of people out of work, a lot of businesses out of business, et cetera. Sports is not immune to that. They have been able to play, obviously, but under much different circumstances. I guess just start us off with a general comment on how you think sports has dealt as an entity, as a holistic entity with COVID, and where they are right now. What are owners thinking about right now?
Yeah, it's a lot of shock and awe, as it is for all of us, and trying to figure out what's going on. I think it's a really, and I think this is endemic of all Americans right now. Trying to figure out, why haven't we been saved? Why hasn't our government been smart enough to figure this out and get it done like they have in the past with so many other issues? Why don't we have a cure to this? And I think sports is no different. They're like, what do we do? There's literally this incredible sense of fear of the unknown that impacts all of us, I think. And we're not used to that. We're used to wanting answers and wanting them in certain amounts of time. And we expect our leaders to do that. So in sports, you expect the commissioners to have a good, solid plan. You want to know exactly how I'm getting out of this financially. And none of that, or very little of it, is forthcoming. And it varies by the sport. Basketball, again, I think, is right at the top of the heap in terms of how they've handled it. They've done really, really smart stuff on testing. They've been way ahead of the game. Their bubble seems to be almost impenetrable. They're going at the production really, really well, I think, much better than I expected. You watch it and it's not what it used to be to watch when you had people going crazy, but it's good. It's good. It's going to be more difficult with football. That's going to be a harder production. Baseball's fits and starts, and again, there's a lot more players in baseball, right? And they're going to go out and do stuff that the basketball players aren't necessarily going to do. They're going to misbehave more. Basketball players tend to be the most disciplined athletes out there. Same is true with hockey. They're going to do the same thing. And football is even worse. That's even a bigger crew. Football, such a huge challenge with the number, just the mass of people involved in it. And then you add in their lifestyles and their youth and everything else. And it becomes very, very complicated. So there's so many moving pieces to this. It's the owners, it's a league, it's the players, it's the unions, it's broadcast, it's sponsorship. It's all just in this really, really ugly mix, and they're all trying to figure it out. Same is true in real estate right now, because in real estate you have people who can't pay rent and landlords who aren't getting rent, and they're not paying banks, and none of the three of them know how to do how to figure this out yet. So they're not going after each other. And the same is true in sports. They're not going after each other yet. But things are going to start to happen. And the reason for that is the money's going to run out. Now, in all the leagues, they've become much more liberal on taking on new debt. You know, the NFL went from $350 million in debt to allowing $150 million more. That's an extraordinary amount. And they got the player union to agree with that because player union didn't have much choice if they wanted to get paid. So everybody plays ball together right now. Same is true with broadcast. Broadcast is dying for the content, absolutely starving for the content. You look at what those Nielsen ratings were for the draft, you know, where you're sitting around watching people in their dens, you know, deciding who to pick. No, it was over the charts watching that, you know, and part of it was pretty damn entertaining. I gotta admit. So they're all forced to deal with each other, and so far so good. Where it's getting really scary, I think, is with the arena sports teams, because in so many of these cases, in an awful lot of the cases, the owners of the NBA team are also dependent on hockey and dependent upon concerts and depending on conventions and meeting space. So there's nothing going on in those buildings, nothing. So unlike football, basketball, and to a much lesser extent hockey, they've been able to kind of maintain the status quo in terms of running their businesses and their operations. But Ted Leonis just laid off 30% of his staff. He didn't have anymore, you know. So Madison Square Garden's in deep, deep cash flow problems. I got to believe Jerry Jones is in deep doo-doo. You know, that building of his operates 365 days a year, and it's got all kinds of stuff going on in it. It's not just football. It's not just concerts. It's got meeting rooms all over the place. And so that's probably where the most pressure is. Now, I am starting to get calls looking for capital. And they're not looking for debt because they can't get any more debt. And they're having problems paying the debt that they have. And so now you're going to start to see owners under pressure.
Without asking you any particulars, you're getting calls from teams looking to bring on more ownership, more capital,
more equity.
Correct?
Yeah, more capital.
Yeah.
John, let me just follow up quick on something you said. I want to make sure that I understand, and I want to make sure our viewers understand. Even though, and this is specific to the NFL for just a moment, even though there will be no fans, at least right now, at any of the games pretty much, right? So NFL teams' revenues are going to be reduced significantly this year because there are going to be no fans in the stands. Players are still going to get their full salary. Is that a correct statement?
On a prorata basis, yes. So per game.
Right. So if a player plays all 16 games, he's going to get his full salary.
That's right.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we all understood that.
Yeah. The economic impact of COVID, especially for the NFL, is not as bad as it would have been had COVID hit, say, 10 years ago. Because 10 years ago, revenue to a team was roughly 50-50 gate versus broadcast. Today, it's more like 65% broadcast, 35% gate. So you're losing 35%. Well, that's a lot of money still. It's, you know, most teams, your average is probably $200 million. So if you're out that $200 million and you still have to run the operation, you're still paying the salaries, you know, what do you do to fix that? Well, the NFL is telling you can now go out and buy another 150. That helps, but you're still going to have some shortfalls. Now, with a lot of owners, that doesn't matter but there are not an insignificant amount of teams that really rely on every penny coming in the door. You know, there are a few teams out there that distribute cash, and some of it a lot of cash. That happens more and more. They won't distribute any cash, but there's a lot of teams that don't distribute, pay it, spend to budget, and sometimes spend more to budget, and they're going to have issues. Now, a lot of them can afford it because they're very high net worth individuals. But if you look at some of the older franchises, their income, the family's income, depends on the team. You know, I can think of at least 10 of them off the top of my head. They need that money for themselves, right? And that's what they live on. So that's where things start to get really, really interesting. The team is pinched. You're worried about paying your debt. You're worried about how you're covering these things. And by the way, you don't have any money coming in for yourselves.
It seems to me that the factor in here that the people that never in a million years thought that this would happen to them are the players. In other words, there's going to come a judgment day for them where the ownership is just going to explain to them, we can't pay you where everything was going up. I mean, it's just the money isn't there right now.
I would beg to differ in the sense that I think the people that are truly freaked out by this are the owners more than the players. And that's because players have a mindset that I'm only good in this game for so long. You know, I'm going to be there for however many years.
Right.
I'm playing really good. I'm making a lot of money. So players are much more fatalistic, I think, about their careers, much more objective about their careers. Owners, they're cocky as hell. You know, they think they're in an elite company because they own a team and they are, you know, important VIPs, and they're there and they're rich. Now, some of them aren't cash rich because, you know, look at the Bidwell family. They led a modest life. The McCaskies in Chicago, you know, Mrs. McCaskey still lives in the same house that she raised kids in, you know. So some of them have led very modest lives. But there's a lot of others who have taken their role as an owner in a team and launched themselves into the lives of the rich and the famous. And it's a really cold glass of water getting thrown on them.
A contract that was just done about 3 weeks ago, which I got to be honest with you, you've disagreed with me on some things tonight. I didn't think there was any chance that in baseball, a team was going to give out a gigantic contract to a player because of the uncertainty. But there were the Dodgers, obviously one of the richest franchises in all of sports, gave Mookie Betts a contract that I didn't think there was a chance in hell anybody would sign a 10-year guaranteed contract.
I don't disagree with you. And Stan Kasten is a very close friend of mine, the president. Right. And Stan thought his money was cut off, that, you know, he was feeling the pain. And the opportunity came up and they gave, okay, Stan, go ahead and do it. You know,
and he did it.
Those guys want to win so bad, and they've spent so much money, you know, trying to get that ring, and they'll get it one day, maybe.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. When sports come back to the extent where fans will be able to go out and experience the games again, John, is it likely that the magic of that is gone somewhat from sports, and that sports is up blank creek without a paddle? I mean, in other words, will fans come back the way they once did to the stadiums?
I think they're going to come back to the stadium. They'll be having sex in the stadium. They'll be drinking in the stadium. They'll be passing joints.
I just want to live long enough to get the sex in the stadium. So.
And I might be right there with them. You know? Yeah, I think, you know, if you look at what's going on college campuses right now, It's a perfect example. People need each other. They want to be around each other. They're going to be so happy to be back there sitting and cheering. And yeah, I don't think that's any problem. I think maybe it's an issue as you get into the upper age demographic.
Yeah.
That has gotten nervous through this. I mean, there's such a big difference in how people react to COVID based on their age, and, the millennials think they're totally harmless. Nothing can happen to them. And, so they'll show up on Towson State's campus and they're all sitting around drinking and sharing bongs. And, so what if we get it? Big deal. Nothing's going to happen to us.
Right.
We may kill our professor, but, nothing's going to happen to us. So I think COVID is very age driven.
Yeah.
And, but I think the tailgates will be totally out of control on the first games.
John, let me ask you, close to home here, and I don't, obviously your conversations with team owners, I know it's private and you've got a lot of things that you can't discuss, but a general question, you look around the NFL, some teams are doing great, some teams are in better financial condition than others. How would you rank the Ravens under Stephen Bisciotti as owner as to how he's running his franchise during the pandemic at this point? And what condition?
Yeah. Well, as you probably know, Steve is not a micromanager, so he is going to leave that to the people who know what they're talking about to make those decisions. I will tell you that, and you probably already know this yourself, that if you talk to the people who really matter in the NFL, if you talk to the commissioner, the other really, really good owners, we are at the very tip top of highly esteemed franchises in the country. I mean, at the very tip top. If there's one regret that you hear about the Ravens in the NFL, is that they wish they had more of Steve's time, that he would be more involved than he is. But that's not his shtick, he doesn't want to waste his time going to NFL meetings. He runs a superlative franchise. And I don't say that because he's a friend. I might say nice things about him if he's a friend, but I am telling you, by all objective standards, our franchise is one of the most highly rated NFL franchises in the country. And, they're in the top of their tier in terms of size on revenues, which speaks to their level of support from all elements and popularity. I mean, it's a very, very, very successful franchise.
John, before we let you go, and I'll give Gary an opportunity if he's got one more for you. I've got a little bit of a curveball question.
All right.
For years, we've always heard that when the owner dies, the sons or family, it's going to be hard for them to keep the team because of the tax implications. How has President Trump's tax cut and then his change in the inheritance taxes, how is that going to affect the future of franchises?
I don't think a whole lot.
Okay.
I really don't. And you've got to realize that the whole father-son thing in sports is not what it used to be. These are not family businesses anymore.
Right.
And Steve, as an example, does not involve his sons in the business. I happen to know what his plans are, and that's farthest thing on his mind. He thinks about his sons and the way you and I think about our kids. It's not true with all franchises, but if you look at what happened with Jerry Richardson in North Carolina, where he fired both of his sons, these businesses are big now. They're important, and a guy like David Modell would have made the cut probably because he was such a damn good salesman, and
he was great, yeah.
And he was a great motivator, and he was a goofball. I loved him.
We all did.
different, but he brought a lot to the equation. And that's not so true anymore. The buyers that you have of franchises right now no longer think of it as this is going to be the family business. This isn't the Bengals where the entire family works for the team. It was in Arizona where it was the Bidwell kids, the son, the daughter, who worked for the team. And those days I think are over. So the tax implications are no longer as important in the industry as it was. I don't know whether that's the case with the Orioles or it's not the case. I have no idea. And it doesn't matter. I mean, it really is much more business focused right now.
Gary, last question.
Yeah, if I could end it with more of a John Moag question as opposed to a sports question.
Okay.
John, just a few years ago, you were a 9-year-old living around Memorial Stadium, parking cars on game day on your lawn as Oriole fans went to the stadium to play. A few years after that, let's fast forward to today. Can you believe, or can you have imagined the journey that you have taken from that 9-year-old parking cars to where you are today, consulting with major league teams, NFL teams, commissioners, where you are in the sports world today?
And I have a follow-up to that, John, before we let you go. Go ahead.
Well, can any of you as 9-year-olds have predicted where you'd be today? I don't think any of us as kids. I remember vividly when I was 9 and living on Windermere Avenue and parking cars and thinking Wally Bunker had the hottest car I had ever seen. And I wanted to be a doctor. That's what I wanted to be. And, sometime after that, my little brother got his fingers stuck in the chain of a bike and got the top of it cut off, and it bled all over the garage. And I ran out of there and said, no way. I want nothing to do with that shit. So I there instead. So no, of course not. I never planned on any of it. Never received any of it.
So let me fast forward to when Paris Glendenning, the city of Baltimore, the state of Maryland gets shunned by the NFL. Schaefer has to retire because of the term limits. Paris Glendenning comes in as governor.
Yep.
What's he do when he first talks to you? Does he say, do we have a chance, or I want a team? And would you have ended up in sports had that not happened?
No, I wouldn't have ended up in sports had that not happened. So I'm very, very grateful to Paris for asking me to do that. Having said that, I said, no, I don't want to do that.
I know.
And he didn't say anything about go out and get a team. What he said to me was, I want you to be chairman of the stadium authority. I said, I don't want to do that. We've been through the expansion. We lost. That ain't going to be And his response was, well, you get 80 games in an Orioles game and you can eat for free and invite all your friends to a nice box. He said, so why don't you do it? So I finally said, all right, but this better not be much work because I'm a busy lawyer. And so I decided to do it. And it was incumbent upon me as the new chairman to, part of the Maryland Stadium Authority directive was that the chairman needed to get a football team back in Baltimore. That was right in the law, and it said he shall enter into any and all agreements necessary or convenient to carry out the purpose of this title. So that was my job. We already had a baseball stadium. And so I started to do my job and had no clue where it was taking me.
I'm going to let us leave it at that because that would open up another hour with you. John Moag, really appreciate your time tonight.
Good seeing you guys.
It's good seeing you. Thank you very much. For Gary Stein, and he's John Moag, I'm Stan the Fan, and we'll see you down the road pretty soon.
See you.